Welcome friends to today's Node.js introductory tutorial. In this tutorial we'll be covering all the essentials of Node.js such as terminal commands, REST APIs with Express.js, testing and client simulation, CRON systems and middleware. So it's going to be an excellent tutorial. Get comfortable and let's get into it. So we're going to start off coming into the Node.js site, and if you don't already have Node.js installed, feel free to install either the current version or the recommended version. Either is acceptable. And once you have them both installed on your computer, you'll be able to come into your terminal and type in npm-v, and it should return the Node version that you currently have installed. And just like that, congratulations, you are ready to start using Node.js in your computer. So once you have Node.js installed and you've checked the version, and so now that you have Node.js installed and you've checked the version so that you know that it's working, we're going to start off by learning some terminal commands, and the first one is going to be ls. And so if you type ls into your command, it's going to list all the subfiles that you have within that particular directory. And that brings us nicely to the second one, which is cd, which stands for change directory. And so I can select a subfolder. For example, I could select documents, wherever it is, whoever can find it first wins, right there. And I can type documents, and I will change directory into that document, so we can see that that has worked just there. I can do that again and cd into tutorials like that. And if I wanted to go back, I could just type cd space and a double period, and that would take me back. So that's how we can quickly navigate through folders in our terminal using these terminal commands or command line interface commands. So now I'm going to come back into tutorials. So now that we're in that folder, and we can check that using parent working directory, which is pwd, we can make a directory, which is mkdir, and we can give it a name, so node tutorial. And so now that we'll have created that file, and we'll be able to find it in here, just here, and now we can cd into that file using node tut, and now we're in that folder directory. Two more to go. The next one is touch, so that just means file create, and we can tell it what kind of file to create. So in this particular case, I'm going to create an index.javascript file, and now we can see if I list that, that is displayed there. And the last one is going to be node index.javascript. And what that is going to do is run this JavaScript file in Node, and it will produce any output. But if we open up that file in our coding environment, we can see that it's absolutely empty, and that's why that terminal command did nothing. However, if we come in here and type in console.log hello world, just like this, and I run that command again, we can see that hello world Node has run this JavaScript file in our terminal. So that's super excellent. We can now run JavaScript files in our terminal and fill them out with whatever content we want. We could console.log 4 times 8, just like that. Run that and we get 32. So that's working excellently. So now the next one in here is going to be npm init. So npm stands for Node Package Manager, and this is included with your installation of Node.js. And we're going to init, which is initialize, -y, a package.json file. And so we can see the contents here, and that has initialized this node package file just here. And this file is critical for managing JavaScript dependencies and having start scripts, and even providing a description or a name of your particular project. Typically there's a project dependent. And we can see that we can use this by typing npm install, and if I type in a package, Express is the package that we're going to be needing for today, it will install this package and add it to the dependency array here. And we can also see that it adds a node modules file, and so that's where that package gets added to, but it's referenced in this dependencies array, and now we can go ahead and use it in our index.javascript file. So that's super convenient. We're also going to install a developer dependency. Now we don't always have to type out and install, we can just use I shorthand, and we're going to do the save developer tag just like that. And in this particular instance, we're going to install NodeMon. And nodemon is just for restarting or continuously running our server.js file every time we save a change. And so we can see here that this developer dependency has been added, and the files will have been added to this node module package just here. So there we can see nodemon. Cool, so that's all good. So now if I come back in here and console.log working JavaScript file, we've seen that we can run it using our node command, but what if we wanted to run it using an npm script? And so we can add a script just like this and say node index.javascript. And now when I type in the terminal, node package manager run, and then that particular script start, it will once again run that script, and we can see what script exactly has been run or what command has been executed in the terminal, and we can see that that JavaScript file has been run. Now the whole purpose of having nodemon is that we can interchange node with nodemon, and so now when I rerun this script, it will execute that file. However, now when I change this, changed working file, we can see that it immediately gets re-executed as soon as I save this file instead of me having to run that start script once again. So that is super convenient. So now we have two packages installed. We have a working JavaScript file and we have node commands working in our terminal. The last thing that is good to know about is node version manager. And so if I cancel this and type in nvm, nothing gets found because I do not have it installed. But if you are having difficulty with different versions of Node, you can simply look up node version manager, and installing this into your terminal will quickly allow you to change between different Node versions depending on what your requirements may be. And just like that, we can check off terminal commands. So the next thing we're going to look at is REST APIs, and for this we're going to start off with a bit of a diagram. So now that we've initialized Node and we can run Node files on our computer, we can essentially set up our computer as a server. Servers are good for a variety of reasons, and we're going to look at how servers can work, especially using Express.js, which is a lightweight Node.js web framework for, hosting web servers. So essentially, here we have a client's computer. And so this might be you. And you go onto your computer and you type in the name of a web address, or you want to interact with the web. That sends off a request from your computer, request, and depending on the URL that you type in, that arrives at a server. So here we have a server. Now the server is typically denominated by the domain, so you might type in google.com, and so that is the domain. In this particular example, my website is smalljames.com. And that identifies or directs that request to a particular computer or processing machine. Now, once we get to the server can be analogous to an entire school. You arrive at school. Let's say you have science first period. You have to get to the science building to do science. Now, this is representative of routes. So if I have a request and it's Google/search, search would be the route, so we would go search. And so our server directs a request specifically to a particular route. And once we're at the route, we perform an action depending on what REST verb we provide. And so there's a number of REST verbs, but the most common ones are get, post, patch, put, and delete. Now, get is for getting information. You request a particular thing, you request a search item. Post is for sending new information to a server. So like you want to send a package from your computer to the server to the particular route. Maybe you save it to a database and perform that action. Patch is if you're trying to update an already existing item. Put is when you're not sure if that's an item, so you just want to place it there if it is, otherwise create that item. And finally, we have delete, which is when you want to remove a particular item from, per se, a database or whatever. And so in that particular case, if you were persisting information, this request from the client computer, let's say they create a login or they register, it reaches the server at your web domain, navigates to a particular route, runs the post command, and creates a database entry for that user. And maybe if you're deleting a user, then you'd use the delete verb and that would delete it. And finally, once you've run this method, we send information all the way back to the beginning in the form of a response. And it tells the user or updates their UI or their browser or their computer that their application has either succeeded or failed and potentially why. And so this is essentially the cycle that REST APIs use to perform basic tasks. So now that we've seen how requests work and we've installed some packages, what we're going to do is initialize a server on our computer, a web server, by requiring in that package that we had installed, and we're going to call it as a function and name it app, and app is going to be our server. So we can call Express as a server just like that, and we can provide it the port that we talked about, which is essentially equivalent to the domain. So in this particular case, we're going to say port is equal to 8383, and we can tell our app to listen to those requests on our port. And when our server starts, we can just say console.log backticks server has started on port. Template literal string and pass the port in here. So if I refresh that and open up our terminal, restart our package, we can see that our server initializes on that port. And so now we can check out that functionality we were just talking about, localhost 8383, and we can see that we get nothing. However, if we look into our networking tab and refresh that page, we can see that we do indeed send out a localhost. However, we get a response code of 404. And that's happening because we haven't defined any routes, which are all important. So in this particular case, we could do a get route, so app.get, so that is the verb, and we do the route. The route is just going to be the home route, so that's going to be the original domain. So I guess you could call that the entrance. And in here we take a request and a response, so an arrow function, and we can res.send our response, and we could just send hi back to the user. So if I refresh this page, we can see that we do in fact get hi displaying on the page. And if we look at that request here, we see that request and the response is hi. So that's super cool. What else can we do with responses? Well, we can also send data. So let's say we have an object that's called data, and well, actually even better, let's just say we have an object with a key that is message and the value is hello world. So now when I refresh this page, we can see that we get that message rendering, which is super cool, and it's displaying that data. Now if I look into our network once again and just check out the request that gets made, we can see that we get the response in the form of the object. And we could also say .json to be more explicit and just say that we're sending JSON, and that would be totally equivalent. Now we could also send back a status, so we could say res.send status, and in this particular case we'll say 200. And so now when I do it, we can see that it's just a response of OK, and the status is 200, and we can check that by coming into the headers, and we can see that we get a status back of 200. Now there are different status levels. There's 200 and 200 level, or 200 to 299, which represents successful. 300s, which are very uncommon, not often used. 400s, which represent a failure on your request. So perhaps you don't have authentication to make that request, or it's going to the wrong route, or it can't find anything. And finally, 500 level statuses, which indicate an error has occurred on the server, and so the response couldn't be sent in the first place. So we could send a 200 back just like we've done there. And we can actually chain our responses. So let's say we wanted to send a status and a response. We could say .send hi, just like that. And now we get hi back. However, it is a 200. We could change that back to a 400. And now we get a 400, but we still do get that information. So let's leave it like that. And finally, we could turn that back into a message and once again send some JSON, or even just like that. And we once again get that message with hi and a successful status of 200. So that is excellent. What else can we send back to the user? So they have arrived at our route, and let's make it slightly more complicated and call it James. So they come to our domain, which at the moment is localhost 8383, so that particular port. Now they're going to have to route to James. So we can see that this doesn't work because we don't have a home route. However, if they come to my science classroom at James, we can see that that does once again work. So that is our route. We can, just while I'm at it, chain routes. So welcome. And now if I go here and type /welcome, that will be equivalent. However, if I go to James, we'll get a GET request. And now what we can do is we could send back HTML. So we could do backticks, template literal, and have an h1 tag that says hello world. Close that h1 tag. And now if I refresh the page, we can see that we get bold text. I can make this more complicated by adding a style equals color of blue. So if I send that again, we get a color of blue. And you can do just about anything you want with this, to the point where you could send an entire HTML file. And we can do that by creating a new folder in our root directory called public. And in here, we can initialize an index.html file, use the exclamation shortcut to generate some boilerplate, call this James response. And down here, we can say hello world, and we could apply a style here that just says background black. And so now, if we come back into our index file, the last thing we have to do is just tell our server to use the public directory. And so we can say app.use express.static, because it's static content, and just say look for that static content in the public directory. And that's great for assets such as images or fonts that perhaps you want to serve up to your client as well. And so now when I refresh this page, we still get this, but that's because we've gone to that particular route. However, if I come to our home route, just localhost 8383, we get that black response back. And that can be fixed by just saying color white. And if I refresh that, we have our styled HTML page. So that is excellent. We can serve up server rendered HTML. So that just means that this HTML gets generated onto the server, sent to the client, and rendered immediately. So now that we know how to make different routes, let's look at the different verbs that we can have. And for this example, I am going to have an app.post rec response. Open that up, and then I'm just going to replicate this 5 times so that I can get my patch, put, and delete routes all working nicely. Now, notice that they're all verbs that are at the home route. So you can have as many verbs as you want for a particular home route. However, you only want to have one get method or get verb per route. So in this particular case, I could have an app.get home route as well, and that won't overlay because the verb is specific to that route. So let's just have this in here, app.get request response, and open that up. So we can define all of these different routes. What we're going to do to test them is simulate a client by adding a file called test.rest. Now, these files can be run in VS Code if you have the extension REST client. And so if you just quickly install this client, these REST files can really effectively be used as an alternative to Postman. And we can just run a simple GET request by writing GET, and we can just say http:/localhost 8383. And in this particular case, if I sent that request, we can see that we get back this HTML that in our browser would be rendered on the page. Now, if I went to that other route, which was James/welcome, send that GET request, we can see that we get back that second lot of HTML just like that. And so in here, the other thing we're going to do for this demonstration is just create an object called friends. And we are going to test all of these methods out. So I'm going to name it friend. And we're going to test all these method outs by using the route friends for each of them. So here we have friends. If someone requests to get friends, we're going to res.status 200, send back a successful request and send our friends file, just like that. And so now if I come back here and simulate that request by coming to friends, we can see that if I send that request, I get back an empty object because I have no friends. Now in this particular case, we could use the post route if we wanted to create a friend. And so post is different from get because get is specifically a give me, whereas post is a you send something and you get back a status of that postage. So for example, you send a parcel to a different country, you get a confirmation of response. And so to send a post request, we once again separate these and write post to that same route. We have some additional things we have to specify here. So we have to specify content type is application/JSON to say that we're going to send JSON as the package of the request that we're posting. And finally, we can specify here, so we can say friend, and we could say use that as a key, and we could just say the friend is called James. And so now when we send that request, we get nothing back because we haven't responded to it in our server here. However, what we can do is come into here and receive that request by saying const body is equal to request.body. And now what we could do is console.log body. And finally, we could res.send status, just a 200, to let the user know that we have indeed received their request. So now if I rerun this, we get an OK, which means that the server has received our content. However, if we look at this, we get undefined, and that's because we have to tell our server to expect JSON, and we can do that by saying app.useExpress.json. And so now when I rerun this request, sending the friend as James, we get back the adequate response. However, now we get undefined, and that's because I made a small error here. That is not meant to have that. And so if I resend that request, we can see that we do in fact receive James on the other end. And so if I send that once again, just changing the front end a little bit, we can see that the body prints specifically to the object with the thing James. And so I could just destructure friend out of request.body and just directly console.log friend straight off the bat. And now when I send that once again, we just get James back. And so what we're going to do is, in this particular instance, we're going to add James to our friends. And so we're going to say friends and add in the friend here and just say equal to a verb that describes him. So that is cool. So now we can once again run that request, and I can get my friends, and we can see that we get James back that says cool. I could run this again and it will just overwrite it. However, now if I changed this to say Lucy, and here if I change that to funky, run both of them again, we'll see that we get back Lucy, who is funky. And the reason we don't get both is because our server restarted and we lost all of our information. Now we could improve this and just say adjective describing word. And so in this particular case, we could say funky. And so now if I save that, I don't have to preset this word. I can just destructure adjective and just set this to the adjective. So let's restart that. And now I can have Lucy and I can post this. I can change this to James and say cool and post that. And so now when I get both, you can see that I get back both of them. So we can take this one step further and come into our patch route. And so in this particular case, this is when we want to update information. And just for this demonstration, I'm going to make this an asynchronous function, as if for patch we needed to make an asynchronous call. And so what I'm going to do is res.send friends back. So I'm going to respond with our friends. I'm also going to send a status so that we can see that it has been updated. Status of 200.send. However, from the information, we're going to destructure it just like we did up here. And now what we're going to do is update friends, the friend, with the new adjective. So that is going to be equal to new adjective. And we will just change that like here. So if I come into my REST file, so let's say I save this, come into my REST file and write ## post the same link and include this content type line. And now I could say friend, open that up. The friend is still James, however, we've had an argument, and so now I don't like it, so I'm going to have new adjective, and that is going to be lame. And so if I run this, we can see that we get an OK, we get back our friend who is cool, and we send, this is patch, sorry. We send that patch request, and now James is lame. However, since I included an uppercase, it's done it like that. And so if I run this patch request, both Jameses get changed to lame. And in this particular case, it's returned that entire object instead of just a status because we told it to send back all of friends. Now put and delete are similar. I guess the last one would be delete. And so we can just run the same method here. And let's say we really didn't like a friend, and so we wanted to remove them. We could just say delete friends. And in this case, we only need friend. Delete friends, friend. We don't need the adjective, we do need the friend. And so now if I come into our backend, we should probably make sure we spell that correctly. So we create a delete route. So I'll just copy all of this, paste it there. Delete, let's say we wanted to delete James because we've had a really big argument. So we can run this all again. We can create our friend James, send that request, James exists. We can patch it, change him to lane, and finally we can delete him. And this isn't working because I have a comma here, so now I can run that delete, and we can see that it filters out James. But the server actually broke, so let's just run that once more. So I can create James, I can patch it, so now we have two of them, and I can delete James, and that gives us back an object that is empty because obviously both of them don't actually fit the word that I'm trying to delete because it was a capital J, but that's the moral of the story. It just deletes everything. And so the next thing we're going to look at is CRON functionality. And so CRON is just to run things in chronological time. So for example, let's say you wanted something to occur at every interval. For example, you wanted to console.log friends every 3 seconds. You would use a CRON scheduler for that. And so the CRON scheduler will just run in the background, and every time that particular interval that you specify elapses, it will run the logic inside that block. And so we can initialize this by just saying function CRON and open that up. And it takes 2 arguments. The first one is going to be a millisecond amount, and the second is a function. And here we can just say async function callback in case you have any asynchronous logic. So now that we've defined that function, here we want to say let timeout equal to set timeout, pass it the callback function that we have in the millisecond amount, which is entered just above. And in here, so this will call this callback function at the end of that millisecond duration. We can just clear that timeout, which is called timeout, run our function, which we'll see in a second. So we can run fn, call it, and finally reset the timeout to be the callback and the millisecond amount. And so just down here, I could say cron, pass it 2000 milliseconds, and just have console.log James is cool. And so now if we check out our server, we can see that every 2 seconds it will print James is cool. And let's say I wanted to, for example, print off friends. If I restart that, we can see that friends is currently empty. However, if I run this post request, now we get Henry coming back, and if I change that to James, and run that, send that request, we get James back as cool and Henry. And finally, if I changed James to lame using this patch request, we get James coming back as lame every 2 seconds. And just like that, we've learnt cron functionality. And so now that we've looked at cron, the next thing we're going to look at is just other ways that we can send information, and that is with query parameters. And so you define a query parameter with a little semicolon like this, and we can receive that by saying const the particular parameter is equal to request.query. And so in this particular case, we could console.log that ID that we get and send back friends. And so now if I save that, our server gets reinstantiated. And now if I post that, create that, and then send this request, we cannot get friends because I've changed that route. But if I change that to say James, we get back James is cool. And we'll note that undefined gets printed, and that is because it's meant to say parameters, not query. So now if I rerun this and just say post that so we have someone and get that back, we get James is cool, and James is printed as the query. And so that can be really good for specifying particular pieces of information. Or for example, if you just wanted to get back the word, so now I could say friends and give the ID. So in this particular case, if I create that friend and run that request, we get that word back specifically. Now the other way we can pass that information is with a query instead of a parameter. And we do that by appending the end of our domain and our routes and our parameters with a question mark. And here we could say API key is equal to a banana. And I can destructure that banana just here. So banana is equal to request.query, and I can console.log banana. And we could say if, for example, if not banana, then we could res.send status 403, which means permission denied. And so now when I run this, if I remove the key and save that and get that, it says forbidden. And if I add the key, banana, create a user and add banana, we get forbidden, and that's because I forgot the API key is equal to, and now I get that, and it's still forbidden because I'm a Muppet, and here it should be API key, not like that, and API key should be equal to banana. And so if I run that once more, we get cool back just as we expect we would, and it's all permissible. Now finally, we have one last thing, and that is middleware. And so technically, just here, what we've been doing, these two lines are considered middleware. But we can have a function, let's call this midware, that takes a request, a response, and a next, and it essentially runs in the middle. And so what we could do here is just say console.log running middleware, and we could say app.use and just pass that function midware like that. However, with midware, what you have to do is just call this next function, which just says, okay, middleware is cool, move on. And so now we have a server, it runs every 2 seconds. If I minimize this, let's say we add James just like that, we can see that middleware gets executed, middleware gets executed again, middleware gets executed again. And this is just great, for example, if you had routes that you wanted to protect with user authentication or anything like that. The one thing that you could do is that we could say if, in this particular case, we could once again destructure request.query just like this, so these 3 lines. We could in here, if API key is or not API key, we can res.send status 400. And so what that will do is authenticate every route. And so here, if I send this, we get ID is not defined. And that's because I'm trying to console log it there. So that's my bad. So now if we run this, this route will be protected by that middleware. And so if I try get is fine, post is not fine. Oh, once again, we just have to return this so that it doesn't ever reach the next function. Return it just like that. And so now when I get, that works fine. However, when I post, we get undefined and we get back a forbidden status. Get is good. We post, we get forbidden. We patch, we get forbidden. And that's because everything is blocked by this middleware function that runs in between or just before the route. Now, the last thing you can do is if you don't want to use it everywhere, we could console.log that out. And now when I post, the post once again works. If I get, we get James is cool. If I change this to Lucy, good spelling there, we post, we get two things coming back. Now, let's say we just wanted to authenticate this particular route. We can pass the middleware just here to this get route by just calling midware like that. And so now this midware route will be protected, but we can see that it's still fine. This server request still says Lucy, and so I can say James and add that in there. So now we have Lucy and James. But if I were to exclude the API key from this now protected route, we can see that, and that's super not happy because I'm such a muppet and I'm applying that to the wrong route. So if I just change that and add midware here, this middleware will be applied specifically to this route. And so now I can send that. However, if I get, we run the middleware and nothing happens. And we'll look, we get a forbidden status. And so now only this one route is protected. And that's pretty much it. You can do just about anything you want with this. You could send data to an information. You can run cron systems. You know how to implement middleware. We can send whatever we want to the user. So congrats, you're a pro. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like and subscribe, means a lot. Catch you guys later. Peace.